Welcome back. Power rankings time. So there were some relatively decent sized swings on the board this week. And there was one team I had to kind of market correct down. And then there's a few that just had really good weeks. And so they move up, in some cases moving back up to places they've been before. I'm wearing my Teddy Bluger jersey, Bluger being my favorite member of the Penguins. And it's a 53 thing, I think. I don't know. I seem to like players who have the number 53 on their jerseys. Yeah, so there you go. It starts with Horvat and Bluger, and then I'm looking around the league, and it's something I've noticed with all the hockey I watch. I'm like, oh, I really like, oh, he's a 53. I like that player. He's a 53 as well. Story checks out. So this week's power rankings, there's some big shifts. Now, the team that's at the bottom has changed. The number 32 ranked team, they're competitive, but they drop one spot from last week, and that's Arizona. So the pucks I'm using this week are the reverse retro ones, but I'm going to use the regular logos. And when you get a puck from the NHL and it's got this holographic silver, don't take that off if it's covering like a painted section, because then you're just going to have like a blank spot there. Usually, sometimes you can get it where there won't, but if there's a blank spot, it looks worse than you having the holographic NHL logo on there. I don't know why they do that, especially on a puck like that. But there you go. Number 32 is Arizona. All right, we ready to move along? All right. Number 31, dropping 2 spots from last week. It's bad. It's bad. It feels like it's getting worse. It's bad all around in Vancouver. They're down to 31st. And I don't know where it goes from here, but I know they play Boston tomorrow. So it can always get worse before it gets better. I'm pretty sure that's how it goes. Number 29, or number 30, I should say, dropping 2 spots from where they were last week. Now that they're back playing, the Ottawa Senators have gone back to losing. Competitive in games. They had that wild game against Colorado, which they lost. They were competitive at times against LA. They lost. They had some good moments against San Jose. They lost. So that's the basic theme this week, is that, yeah, you can have these, interesting results and interesting games, but if the end of the game is you're still losing everything, you end up at this far down on the power rankings, which is 30th for the Ottawa Senators. Number 29, moving up 1 spot this week, Montreal. So for Montreal, a big win over the team of the jersey I'm wearing tonight. But by big win, it feels like it's revenge for that 6-0 loss they suffered against Pittsburgh earlier this year. We need to see more than one good game in a row from the Montreal Canadiens. They're going to have like a fantastic month to really get back into the hunt. And I don't know. It sounds like there's a lot of pieces maybe moving behind the scenes, and they may already be trying to figure out who the GM is going to be next year, which means either the team's decided that they're going to move on, or Bergevin's decided, or they both have, right? Maybe it's like Columbus with Tortorella, where both sides were like, yeah, this isn't going to work. Number 28, dropping 7 spots from last week. 7. It's the Islanders. Now, the Islanders, they announced tonight, are shut down. So the Islanders will not play again until Thursday, because that 8th player is on the protocol list. So now that they've got 8 players on the protocol list, the Islanders have been shut down for their next 2 games, which will be rescheduled. The NHL, of course, is not wanting to do this at all. They're trying to do whatever they can to avoid it, but in this case, they had to. There's just too many players that are on the list. But before we had this problem with everybody being on the list, they still weren't winning a lot of games. And so for the Islanders, it is a tough situation that I think we'll see, right? We'll see whether or not things get better for them when everybody gets healthy. But in the Metro, it's tough to turn things around. The Metro's pretty stacked, especially at the top. Number 27, same spot as last week, and that's Buffalo. So Buffalo, competitive, doing what they have to do. They're not at the bottom of the board, as was expected before the season started. Before the season started, the expectation was Buffalo and Arizona were going to be easily the worst teams in the league, and they're not. But they're not winning enough either. So at 8-10-3, their record's not fantastic. They end up 27th overall. And so we're into better luck next year territory, but we'll see how long we stay there, right? Number 26, moving up 6 spots from last week. Last week they were dead last. Now they've won 3 out of 4. And it's not just that they're winning, it's who they're beating. Today it was Florida, giving Florida their first defeat at home of the season, and they look pretty good. So I think the expectations for Seattle before the season, I had them at 5th in the division, Probably a little bit ambitious, but the season's still young. There's the possibility they still end up 5th in the division. And again, they're starting to look like a team. And not everybody's going to be Vegas. Not everybody's going to coalesce right away. It can take time. So brand new coaches, brand new systems, everything they're learning. I think Seattle's starting to figure it out. And so while they do have a bunch of losses, their record is better than some of the other teams on the board. So I'm willing to cut them some slack and say, hey, this is a team that could still get it together and end up maybe with a 500 record by the end of the season, which I think Ron Francis would take. I think Francis would take that if they ended up 500 at the end of the year, 84 points, something like that, right? So while it looks like that's unlikely, Drieger played well tonight, and Grubauer has started to come back too. And if Grubauer and Drieger can give them the goaltending they need, Seattle will get their share of victories. Number 25, the last team in this row is Chicago. They move up one spot from last week. Chicago hasn't moved out of this row yet, but they're close. They're close. And so for Chicago, I think they just have to keep doing what they're doing. There's setbacks here and there, sure, but they're still winning more than they're losing right now. And so they're digging their way out of the mess they were in, where they were all the way down in this area, and now they're up there. So a team in this area might be able to get up there if they start playing well. Not that I'm talking to the puck or anything, right? Number 24, dropping 4 spots from last week, is San Jose. It's honestly, at this point, San Jose, while their overall record isn't bad, they're trending in the wrong direction. And so for me, San Jose, I dropped them this week down to 24. They're teams that just passed them, and some interesting results in their games too. So for San Jose, they're not out of it. The Pacific Division still looks wide open, although Edmonton's got a very good record. Calgary's got a very good record. Vegas has started picking it up too. So that's 3 spots. And then you've got Anaheim that looks like maybe they will be able to stay above water. So those 4 spots means for San Jose, they'd likely be on the outside looking in, unless both of the wild cards came from the Pacific, which would really truly be wild, right? Number 23, moving up 2 spots from last week, so they're out of the bottom row, and that's Detroit. Detroit's winning enough that they're staying ahead of a lot of teams below them. They're not winning enough that I've moved them up past this. Detroit has, what is it now? It's 10 wins in 22 games. So that's 12 games they didn't win out of the 22. And again, Detroit, this is not a year that there's any pressure on them to make the playoffs. And with Tampa Bay and Florida looking like they're the powers of the Atlantic, along with Toronto, Boston's still in the mix too. Again, the playoff question becomes a little bit problematic when you're looking at some of these teams and how well they're doing. And again, it's nothing against Detroit. It's just, it's tough to pass those teams when they're playing as well as they are. Number 22, dropping 5 spots from last week, LA. So they turned it around tonight, and maybe this is the start of another winning streak, right? So they had the losing streak, the winning streak, and then another losing streak. So they're the epitome of a streaky team. Can the Kings stay on this path now that they started with a win over the Ottawa Senators? We'll see, right? The Kings, though, there's some interesting pieces to this team. They definitely have the goaltending that can turn things around. And so we'll see if they go on another winning streak. It's possible. We didn't see the other winning streak coming, so it's possible they go on another one. Number 21, moving up 1 spot from last week, and that's Nashville. Nashville has stayed very much in this same area. And I didn't bust them down for tonight's result because I looked at that result tonight and I said, yeah, that's about right. Colorado is playing some of the best hockey right now. So I didn't penalize Nashville based on that. They've had some inconsistency in their game. Their overall record is half decent, but again, we're going to start getting into the conversation of which teams are most likely to stay in the playoff hunt, which ones are most likely to fall out, and then the questions to the GM start of, so which GM is going to be the first one to say, you know what, it's not here, we're not going to make it this year, and I want to get maybe draft picks, prospects, this kind of thing. So we'll see, and that's a question we had with Nashville last year, and then they went on a huge run and made the playoffs. So maybe it happens again. Number 20, dropping 1 spot from last week, is New Jersey. Another team that wins here, loses there, and just the overall numbers, I don't see them as a playoff team. They're competitive. They're definitely better than they were last year or the year before that. And yes, maybe when Jack Hughes comes back, they start winning games more regularly. They end up back in a playoff spot, and maybe they can surprise everybody. That whole NJD versus everybody. And I get it. But for me, I still have them at 20th on the board. So, yeah, number 20, New Jersey Devils. Number 19, dropping 9 spots from last week, Philadelphia. Rough week, and I don't like doing it. I don't. But the losses are a lot. And Philadelphia has had some iffy games in there too. Their schedule is so tough. I do expect Philadelphia to turn this around again. But for this week's power rankings, 19th is where I got them. They just, and again, it was early in the week that I dropped them down to about here. And as the week went along, they just proceeded down to 19th. There were 18 other teams I felt were ahead of them. But again, their goaltending's been all right. I understand they're not scoring goals enough. I think that'll come around, and we'll see. Number 18, moving up 6 spots from last week, unexpectedly, Dallas. Dallas looks remarkably competent right now. I hadn't expected that. They got the win over Colorado. I really didn't expect that. So they've been a pleasant surprise over the last week. And so they move up to 18th from 24th, where they were last week. And we'll see whether or not this continues. You know, can the Dallas Stars continue to find the net? Robertson seems to be picking it up. Hintz is picking it up. And, I mean, really the question becomes one of, if the veterans continue to not produce, and I'm talking about Sagan and Ben and others, not Pavelski, though. Pavelski's been fine in recent games. But what does Dallas do if Sagan and Ben aren't living up to their contracts? Is there anything they can do with those contracts at this point, right? So I have Dallas at 18. We'll see if they continue to rise next week. Number 17, also moving up 6 spots from last week, is Pittsburgh. Now, if Pittsburgh had gone out there tonight and destroyed Montreal, they probably would have moved up further. I had them at 17th coming into today, watched the game against Montreal, and I went, eh. So Montreal moved up the 1 spot today over Ottawa, and Pittsburgh stayed where they were. I thought, no, that's fine. So Pittsburgh stays in that 3rd row, but they're at the front of it, and I never count Pittsburgh out. Even if the power rankings board says they're down here, I'm going to be very surprised if they're not in the playoffs at the end of the year, because that's what Pittsburgh does. It's kind of their MO. Number 16, moving up 2 spots from last week, is Columbus. Now, Columbus did not outplay Vancouver in that game that Elvis stole. And then the Blues beat them pretty handedly tonight, in part because Korpisalo isn't as good as Elvis. So I'm torn on this, right? So you have a game that Columbus lost that if Elvis had played it, at least would have been closer, and maybe they win it. And then there's a game against Vancouver, where if Korpisalo played that one, Vancouver probably wins. So Columbus moves up into the top 16, but I'm not sure if we know what Columbus is yet. They're fun to watch, and there's a lot of depth there. I think Sillinger's been a really good find for them, and I think the goaltending question needs to be answered sooner rather than later. I don't think Korpisalo finishes out the year as their backup. I think that if Elvis's numbers continue to be so much better than Korpisalo's, you've got 2 options. Elvis gets overplayed, or you get another backup and you move on from Korpisalo. We'll see what they do. But for Columbus, a team that absolutely could make the playoffs in a year that it's not expected, it might come down to figuring out the backup goaltending and finding somebody who can keep the puck out of the net as well as Elvis does. Number 15, dropping 1 spot from last week, the Anaheim Ducks. The Ducks, it wasn't a great week for them. It ended on a better note than it started. And so we'll see, right? We'll see whether or not the Anaheim Ducks can stay in a playoff spot with Vegas getting better, Colorado getting better, and just the numbers start to become a little bit more dicey. And Dallas getting better too. So there's a lot of teams right now that are going to threaten Anaheim's spot. But I didn't drop them much. I liked the last game they played this week. We'll see whether or not they can continue, and if Troy Terry gets on another run. And, Stolarz with a shutout. I mean, I understand that it's not necessarily a shutout against a powerhouse, but still, nice to see Stolarz with a shutout this week. Number 14, dropping 7 spots from last week, is Winnipeg. Rough week for Winnipeg. They ended on a good note, right? They ended by beating Calgary in a game that Calgary was really good in the 3rd period, but Hellebuck was better. So for the Jets, I have them at 14th overall. and we'll see whether or not they can climb their way back up. They did it before, right? They did it before. The basic rule of thumb seems to be that when I have the Jets in this region, Jets fans get angry and say they're too low. When I have the Jets up in this area, people say that's way too high for the Jets, who aren't Jets fans. So this is, and again, that's standard with power rankings. I honestly get a chuckle out of some of the comments that are, well, that's way too high, and you'll see, like, you look at the avatar and the and the name of the account, and you go, huh? So you think I have Dallas too low, and you got a Dallas avatar and Dallas in your name? Well, at least it's all objective. So again, I understand, I totally get it. And so I expect some to say he might have punished Winnipeg a little too much. But Winnipeg wasn't playing well this week. And I would argue that they probably shouldn't have won that game in Calgary. Hellebuck was fantastic. So they did win it, and we'll see if that can get them on the right track this coming week. Number 13, dropping 2 spots from last week, is Boston. I'm starting to get concerned with Boston. We'll see how this week goes. They have Vancouver tomorrow. If Vancouver beats Boston tomorrow, Boston will drop. Boston needs to go out and win that game against Vancouver. And the loss against the Rangers yesterday was kind of embarrassing on a note. And not embarrassing because it's the Rangers. Rangers are playing very good hockey. It's just the way that Boston lost is like, come on, guys, you got to be better than this, especially at home. So, and again, whenever Marchand does something stupid, that's when Boston's losing. So when people come and are like, I can't believe something's going on with Marchand. I can, because when Boston's losing, he doesn't like to lose, but he always takes it to that ridiculous extreme. So that's Marchand, though. So yeah, Boston drops a couple of spots this week. They stay right around the middle, and we'll see whether or not they stay there this coming week. Number 12, moving up 1 spot from last week, is Vegas. I like Vegas's game. I thought Vegas played well against Edmonton. Koskinen was very good. Edmonton got key scoring from players that it might have been unexpected from on a night where McDavid and Draisaitl were both kept off the board. And so, yeah, Vegas ends up playing pretty well in that game. I'm leaving them at 12th, which is where they were coming into today anyways. And we'll see. We'll see whether or not they end up in the top 3 in the division and staying there. I think they will. Now they got Pacioretty, they got Stone back. And so it's not going to be easy, but it should be easier than it's been for them for the last little while. They just have to hope that the protocol list doesn't grow. The protocol list is bothering a lot of teams in the league, and it's just part and parcel of playing now. That's just how it's going to work for this season. And I think the NHL's plan is to roll with it as much as possible. And again, the Islanders being shut down is one thing. They don't want that to happen elsewhere. So, yeah. But again, for Vegas, we'll see how things go for them. Number 11, moving up 5 spots from last week, is St. Louis. So, St. Louis takes a big dive last week, and they make up about half of that space this week with the results they had. Not a perfect week for St. Louis, but still, they start doing the right things. And tonight against Columbus, that's the kind of hockey that we like to see from St. Louis. And again, was it because Korpisalo was in net? Did they win that game because Korpisalo was in net? Tough to say. But St. Louis is starting to get the results that they want. And so they're up to 11th now on the power rankings yet again. Almost top 10. So who's in the top 10? Number 10, up 5 spots from last week, Colorado. Colorado was cranking off wins against lower ranked teams, whether it's Seattle or Vancouver, and obviously Ottawa too. So those wins don't move them up. But wins like the one tonight over Nashville, other wins they've had recently, that does move them up. They're starting to look like a contender. What's scary is that the Kadri's getting a bunch of points, McCarr's getting a bunch of points, and they're winning games without Nathan MacKinnon. So when Nathan MacKinnon gets back, in theory, they get better. And I say in theory because getting your best players back doesn't always mean that your record gets better. Sometimes teams get kind of lazy. They go, okay, he's back. And then they might rely too much on the player that's returning from injury. So we don't know for sure that Colorado's going to have a really good record when MacKinnon gets back, but they should. They were seen as a contender, and right now they're playing like one. Number 9, moving up 3 spots from last week, the New York Rangers. Rangers almost top row. Almost top row for the New York Rangers. And really solid win for them over Boston yesterday. And so I felt like, yeah, Rangers absolutely 9th overall. And again, If they have another week like this week, they end up in the top row. Top row, though, is tough to get into. You'll notice that there's nobody on this board that was in the top row last week. So the top row is the same 8 teams. Are they in the same order? No. I will say no. Actually, one of them... No, Winnipeg dropped out of the top row. Sorry, Winnipeg. You dropped from 7 to 14. And apologies to Winnipeg fans. They did drop out of the top row. So who got into that spot? Well, not the number 8 team, because the number 8 team didn't change. It's Minnesota. The Minnesota Wild had a good week. And yeah, that's that. They had a good week. They stay at number 8. I didn't see anything this week that made me think they move further up. I didn't see anything this week to tell me that they move further down. And so, yeah, 8th spot for them, and they've shown they can handle Winnipeg. And if they can handle Winnipeg, the next question becomes, so what about Colorado? And so we'll see with Colorado if they're able to handle them the next time they play them as well. Number 7, moving up 2 spots from last week, is Calgary. Calgary's point streak ended at 7 games tonight. I didn't bust them down for that. I don't think that's important. Calgary's had a really good stretch of games, and honestly, Hellebuck kind of steals that one tonight. So again, I didn't bust them down for that. And so we'll see whether or not Calgary forces themselves into the top 6, because the top 6 teams are the same 6 teams that we had last week. Because I really think these teams are playing the best hockey, although one of them looks like they might be ready to drop out. One of them definitely looks ready to drop out next week, and it might be Calgary, it might be Minnesota, it might be the Rangers that end up jumping into top 6 spot. Number 6, dropping 1 spot from last week, is Tampa. Now, this was tough because you'll notice Florida's not on the board yet, and I debated about whether or not Tampa should be behind Florida since Tampa beat Seattle and Florida didn't. So that's the struggle I've had, and I thought, no, Florida was number 2 last week. Tampa was number 5. Tampa drops 1 spot to 6 because there's a team that's playing pretty darn well right now. And so Tampa Bay, 6th place, I think that's respectable. It's just that the team that was in 6th moves up. And if you're a fan of the team that was in 6th place last week, and if you remember they were in 6th place last week, you're like, yeah, all right, we'll see where they are. Number 5, dropping 3 spots from last week, is Florida. Now, what's interesting to me is this. So Florida wins their first 11 games of the season at home, tying an NHL record. Now they've suffered their first loss, and it's against Seattle from down here. So can Florida really get this thing turned around? Because their road record is mediocre. So in the coming week, if it looks like Florida might be spiraling a little bit, they will start to make their way further down the board. If they continue to spiral, I can't have them above Colorado as an example. So then it becomes a matter of, so all the teams between them and Colorado would be playing better than Florida? That could be the case by this time next week. So we'll see how Florida does. But moving down 3 spots in the top 5 is kind of a major move, considering they've been entrenched as a top 2 team for the entire, basically since the season started, they've been top 2. Number 4, dropping 1 spot from last week, and that's Edmonton. So to me, this was a tough one. Edmonton is still playing very well. I just felt like the team that's in the number 3 spot is also playing very, very well. Now, this is where people may get fixated on the spot that their team's in. I've moved Edmonton past Florida with the results from today. I do have Edmonton ahead of them. So there are 3 teams that are ahead of Edmonton right now, which is more than last week, but they've also moved ahead of Florida, who they were behind last week. So, all right, number 3, moving up 3 spots from last week, is Toronto. Now, going out to California and beating the teams in California as they have so far is impressive. And there may be those that say, well, yeah, but that's California teams. Right, but they're 11-2 in November. The record for the Toronto Maple Leafs right now in the month of November is fantastic. They're not allowing a bunch of goals. Wall has looked very good in net, which was unexpected. And it leaves you with the question of, so when Mrazek is healthy, did they try to move him then? Because they'd have cap space if they could move Mrazek and have Wall as the backup. That would add a decent amount of cap space for them, and it might make a lot of sense. And who saw that coming at the start of the year? So for Toronto, yeah, they're legit. And they're getting some depth scoring. Probably not to the level they'd like to, but they're getting depth scoring. And their top 4 are all scoring around a point per game. So things are going quite well for the Toronto Maple Leafs right now. We'll see if that continues to be the case. Number 2, moving up 2 spots from last week, the Washington Capitals. For the Caps, really, this was a huge week for them. They're really showing that they are one of the best teams in the league, and they don't even have most of their roster back. It feels like everybody's out, and yet they're still doing really, really well. Like their forwards. A lot of their forwards are out, right? So Backstrom's getting closer to returning. Eller may very well be back tomorrow. The Caps could end up being the first place team on this board not too long from now. I've been very impressed with the way they've been playing, and that's despite not thinking that their goaltending is necessarily as good as it can be yet. I know there's been shutouts, but I feel like the goaltending can still make that next level improvement, and we'll see. I'm trying not to say level up because I watched The Flash this week, and in the first episode of the new Flash season, they said level up so many times I wanted to punch the TV. So try not to say it. Number 1 on the board, again this week, Carolina. Now, for Carolina, they did lose against Seattle. Part of the reason Seattle moves up 6 spots is because they beat Carolina. And then Carolina kind of spanked Philly last night, yesterday afternoon. We'll see how things go for Carolina this week. The most likely contenders for first right now, in my eyes, are Toronto and Washington. That's why they're 2 and 3. Florida, there's been some inconsistency. Edmonton also has an outside shot at being number 1 next week, if everything goes the way that they would want it to. And of course, they'd have to have a bad week for Carolina as well. So Carolina still has the best record in the league. To me, they're still the best team in the league. Even though they did lose against the Kraken, which I think said a lot about Seattle. Again, I think Seattle is playing better than their record shows you right now. I think they've been playing better than the record showed you all year. And maybe Seattle ends up in this region as soon as a couple weeks from now. It's going to take some time. It's going to take wins in a row and wins over good teams and everything. But I think they're capable of it. And we'll see whether or not Carolina stays first next week. So there you go. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below, as always. I do occasionally see the comment, too, about how people miss when I used to rearrange the power rankings at the end of the video just to throw off people that just fast forward to the end. That's fine. But I'm not going to go back to doing that because channel's so big now, it would seem kind of weird for me to do that again. So I get it. Some days I miss it too, but there you go. There's your power rankings from 1 through 32, from Carolina through to Arizona, and we'll see whether or not Vancouver's 32 next week, right? Let me know your thoughts. Hit like and subscribe if you haven't done so already. Thank you guys so much for all your support. It means a lot. I will talk to you again soon.